The Bitcoin cat is out of the bag. There's no stopping Bitcoin. As you grow your Bitcoin portfolio, you will be shocked at the growth. If you're someone new to Bitcoin, that's great, but you're gonna have to now try and get your money from your bank account into your crypto exchange. What's the top 3 predictions for Bitcoin-backed products 20 years from now? What we've seen to date is I've heard in recent weeks that 2 out of the 4 major banks in Australia implementing, discussing, however you want to call it, options to also custody Bitcoin in Australia. I'm Matthew Fraser and this is Crypto Collective. After making millions with Amazon and e-commerce, I realized that if I was starting again today, crypto would be my first choice. I'm here to help you take your first steps and build real wealth. Ready to set yourself up for life? Let's go. Hey guys, welcome to the Crypto Collective. My name is Matthew Fraser, and in this episode, I'm going to be answering your Q&As. And I want to say, first of all, a big thanks to all those who have sent me DMs and messages, and also within my private school community called Crypto Collective, which you can join. Find the link somewhere in the description. Thanks to all the members who have sent questions to me as well. So let's get into it. All right, guys, the first question is, what is causing the current Bitcoin slowdown, but then also what has been causing it to drop? Well, that's interesting because I would actually say that although Bitcoin in recent times has reached an all-time high within probably the last 2 months, it went up to about $109,000. As of recording today, it's sitting at $98,000. And in that time, it has come down to, I think it came all the way down to about $93,000. Now, in my opinion, that's not a huge drop. Like a huge drop would be if it went from 109,000 and dropped like 50% down to like 50,000. That to me would be a huge drop. This current action is what we'd call sideways action. It's just a chopping sideways up and down within a particular range. And you would say the average price point right now is probably around $95,000 to $97,000 average. And it's been like that for a few weeks now. What's interesting though, is we've actually come up from, if you think back to 2023, it was around 15,000 US dollars a coin. So it's definitely up. And in 2024, Bitcoin rose by 120%. But what's interesting is particularly new people that get into the Bitcoin space or the crypto market, they come in at the highs. So if they got in at 109,000 US dollars and now it's sitting at $98,000, they're scratching their head. They're thinking, hang on a second, I thought Bitcoin just goes up. But of course, Bitcoin, if you look back in all of history, Bitcoin doesn't just go up forever. It goes up, there's corrections, it goes up, there's corrections, like sideways action. And then at some point, like every 4 years, which is the cycle of the crypto market, every 4 years, it then comes back down again. It comes down all the way after a bull market into a bear market, which is where it comes down to its lows again. And that has been the history of the crypto space since the dawn of time now, upwards of 16 years. So those who get into the top though, are now thinking, what's happened? It's dropped. Well, it hasn't really dropped, right? We're still actually in a bull cycle. So the expectation for 2025 is that it could actually reach somewhere. Some people say $500,000, even upwards of $1 million. I mean, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just telling you that some experts who are much smarter than me, they're predicting those sort of prices. For those who are a little bit more conservative, there are some other price predictions out there for Bitcoin in 2025, which is around $150,000. So let's see what happens. But basically, what's keeping it afloat right now is the buying pressure, right? There's a lot of institutions, nation states, and big corporations that are buying, because the argument would be that if it really did drop, you wouldn't have that buying pressure, so they wouldn't be in the space, including things like the institutions like BlackRock, right, who are still buying up a ton of Bitcoin for the ETFs. So basically, I think the essence behind this question, really, and the response is there's really no cause for alarm. Now, that's different though to what's happened in the altcoin space. The altcoin space has been completely decimated. And yes, I do hold some altcoins. I've got some altcoins that have seen now up to a 70% drop. But you got to keep in mind, my portfolio is balanced, right? I wear the Bitcoin hat. I've got the HODL number plates on my car. I'm definitely into Bitcoin, but I do have some smaller amounts of money in altcoins. And look, they're complete gambles. If they went to zero, it wouldn't even matter, right? Because my wealth is going to be created through Bitcoin. So if you're one who can't handle 70% drops, for example, don't put your money into altcoins because you could get absolutely wrecked. Okay, guys, next question. What's the top 3 predictions for Bitcoin-backed products 20 years from now? So I'm going to put my thinking hat on. Well, I can say that what we've seen to date is a huge amount of interest in Bitcoin. Obviously, we've had the ETFs, which got approved in early 2024. So that's really given a big tick to Bitcoin from an institutional level. And you've now got nation states who have also started buying up Bitcoin. El Salvador being probably the most famous of countries that have bought it up to put on in their treasury. They don't even just buy Bitcoin, they're actually mining Bitcoin. They use a volcano and they use the power from the volcano to mine more Bitcoin. So they're definitely invested into Bitcoin. But then through 2024, we saw some other incredible things. One, we saw the election of Trump. He's the first Bitcoin president that we've seen for the US. Now, the US, whether you like it or not, it does lead the way as far as markets and sentiment. Now, as of recording this, it's early 2025. Trump has now been 1 month in office, and there's been a range of, I won't go through all of them, but there's been a range of pro-Bitcoin initiatives that have been put in place. Because of that, we've now seen even banks like Bank of America and JP Morgan, they're now saying that they will start to custody Bitcoin. So when we're talking about products over the next 20 years, it's hard to say what's going to be happening in 20 years' time, because AI is going to be playing such a huge impact. It's going to have a huge impact on our life. Just even the Optimus robots. Can you imagine when everyone in basically the world has an Optimus robot in their house? I mean, I'm definitely going to have I'll need 1 in the house. I'll need about 3 down at the restaurant to help clean the place down. Probably have 1 to do the car. A specially trained robot just to polish the car collection. That's what I'm going to have. But there are banking products. So there's going to be a lot of banking products. Now, already today, we've got banking products, or I should say, not necessarily banking products, but finance products. Now, for example, I already use one of those finance products, and I've been testing this just in recent months. And what it is a company that will lend money to you backed by Bitcoin. So just quickly, how does this work? I give them my Bitcoin, I post that up as collateral, so security. They then give me back 40% of that, which is cash. So if I give them $100,000 worth of Bitcoin in today's dollars, they'll give me $40,000 in cash, which is a loan, right? And so that's just one thing. I've also heard in recent weeks that 2 out of the 4 major banks in Australia are talking about, or actually implementing, discussing, however you want to call it, options to also custody Bitcoin in Australia, okay? So that is absolutely massive. Now, the question is going to be like, okay, well, the bank now holds Bitcoin. How does that now benefit my life? There's actually a few things. One is people do trust banks in Australia. They probably don't trust them in Africa. They probably don't trust them in Lebanon. But in Australia, you do trust the bank. So if the bank's now holding the Bitcoin, you're going to feel better about it. Because at the moment, the banks in Australia don't hold Bitcoin. You have to hold Bitcoin yourself if you don't hold it on exchange. Just on a side note, my advice to you is actually to not hold your Bitcoin on an exchange. And if you want to learn more about that, come into the community. I offer a free community with lots of information. Just find the link somewhere in the description, and I can go through all those types of things. So you're going to be able to do lending on your Bitcoin. So the bank's going to now hold your Bitcoin, and you could borrow against that Bitcoin to perhaps buy a house. That'll be one way. You might have also too, by them custodying the Bitcoin, it's going to attract more people to Bitcoin. That's what I wanted to get to. So more people are going to hold Bitcoin, lend against your Bitcoin to buy other things with your cash. That's a few things that I think that will happen. The other thing will be to do type of split type deals. So banks might actually accept, or even sellers will accept Bitcoin, like you're going to buy a property. They might actually just take Bitcoin. The bank will then custody that Bitcoin. Maybe they'll lend against it. If you wanted to do renovations, for example, on your home, your Bitcoin's gone up in value, you can now pull out more money against your Bitcoin. all those types of things. And I think the traditional finance world, what we've seen as of late, is they are certainly on board. I think in retrospect, they were not on board. They were trying to squash Bitcoin as much as possible. But I think, like they say, the Bitcoin cat is out of the bag. There's no stopping Bitcoin. People have got to remember, not one bank, not one nation state, not one person, not one company controls Bitcoin, right? So even what's happened in many, many years ago, Bitcoin was banned in China. Didn't do anything, right? It just meant that other people around the world just kept accumulating Bitcoin, transferring Bitcoin, utilizing Bitcoin, right? The Chinese were the ones who were left behind. So there's no government now that's really going to put themselves in a bad position, I think, or their people, because it would be to the detriment of their country. Thanks for the question. Okay, next question. Will Bitcoin-backed loans from banks be normal? Will Bitcoin savings accounts have replaced fixed-term deposits in fiat, meaning just general currency? Will Bitcoin be included in all life insurance policies? Well, I kind of covered a lot of that in the last question, but as far as life insurance, that's an interesting one, because this is something that I've been thinking about myself. Now, I personally have life insurance. I hate paying for life insurance, but it's kind of like one of those things that I think that I need to have. And what's so interesting is that I can't even believe that insurance companies will insure you for life insurance or death and disability, right? If you get some sort of a cancer, if you lose a leg, whatever, because there's one thing that you can guarantee in life, and that is you will die. Right, so they're insuring against that, which is bizarre. Mind you, you do pay for it though. Now, the only reason why you would even have life insurance is because if you were taken out of the picture within your family, who's the breadwinner, right? So maybe you have enough life insurance to pay out your mortgage and some other debts. Maybe it's enough to do the mortgage and a lump sum of money for the rest of your family to live into the future without having to rely on your income. But you will get to a point where once you become multi-millionaire status, you then start thinking, hang on, I'm now self-insured, meaning I've got so much money and assets that I don't need to be paying for this insurance policy because I've already got the money. So even if I was to pass away, my family's still got a whole bunch of properties and Bitcoin and cash and whatever it is, right? That said, you may just have an insurance policy that just pays you out because you need liquid cash straight away. Now, the scenario would be that if you were very, very heavy in properties and the income was taken away and you need to access cash immediately, it takes a long time to sell property generally, right? Whereas if you passed away and you had a life insurance policy, it will just pay $1 million straight into your bank account today, and then you can worry about selling the properties later if required. Now, how does that tie into Bitcoin? As you grow your Bitcoin portfolio and do the numbers, right? Because you will be shocked at the growth that obviously we've had 120% in 2024. The average for Bitcoin over the past sort of 4 or 5 years has been sort of 50, 60%. So if you take those sort of numbers, even at 30% into the future, it's going to be quite staggering, and you could end up in the hundreds of millions, if not in the tens of millions of dollars of wealth in Bitcoin terms. Ask yourself, will you need, if you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars worth of Bitcoin sitting in your fund, and it could be in the bank by then, do you need life insurance? The answer would be probably not. You've got Bitcoin. And the other thing is that, unlike property, Bitcoin is liquid. So you can sell it immediately to get cash if you need it. So if you had a $50 million portfolio of Bitcoin, you've passed away, now your family needs to access $1 million, you can sell $1 million worth of Bitcoin to use for whatever purpose you want. So that's what I think is going to happen in the future. I actually think the life insurance policies will no longer be required for those who hold Bitcoin. Think about that. All right, next question. Is paying for another company to host mining machines for us the best way to scale or holding in the long term, considering mining will need to continue as it is for at least the next 115 years? Now, just a bit of context behind that. The way Bitcoin is produced, and this is very sort of broad, the way Bitcoin is produced is through mining machines. Okay, so the mining machines, they spit out the Bitcoin and that's how you get it. Now, what you can do is, if you wanted to, just like what I do, I actually have my own Bitcoin mining machines. Now, I don't hold them myself in my house or in a warehouse. I have bought the Bitcoin mining machines and they're hosted for me in Norway, right, through another company. So they take care of the mining machine. They look after more importantly, the power to run the Bitcoin mining machine. They look after the servicing, etc. And that Bitcoin mining machine spits out Bitcoin to me every single day. I actually would have Bitcoin in my, because I actually do own a warehouse. So I was actually even thinking about why don't I put a whole bunch of Bitcoin mining machines in my own warehouse? Genius. The problem with it in Australia is the cost of energy. The cost of energy in Australia is ridiculous. And unless I was to have my own nuclear reactor in the warehouse that kind of serviced it, which is what some companies are now looking to do in other parts of the world. They have their own sort of small modular nuclear facility to power their warehouse. If I had one of them, which is then becomes like free electricity forever and ever and ever, you would definitely have your own Bitcoin mining machines. But I don't have that, so it's outsourced. Now, in my opinion, it's a great thing to do. One is I just like being a part of the system. I like owning a Bitcoin mining machine, so I've now producing my own Bitcoin. The Bitcoin that comes to me is what's also called virgin Bitcoin. It hasn't been passed around through the group, right? The group of the world. It comes straight from the mining machine, straight to my cold wallet storage. No one else gets to touch it. And it actually isn't delivered to me at a retail price, it's delivered to me at a wholesale price. So when you buy your Bitcoin through an exchange, you're paying a premium, all right, because the exchange has to make money. They're providing a service of selling it. And of course, there's a little bit of fees involved as well. So ultimately, I'm getting more Bitcoin for my buck. The thing to consider though with Bitcoin mining is that the machine that you buy is only going to last probably up to 5 years. And then you've got to buy another machine because your machine now becomes obsolete. There's new machines that are more efficient. They probably use less power. They're going to spit out more Bitcoin based on bang for buck type value. So thank you very much for the question, but I do like Bitcoin mining machines, something for you to consider too. Now, if you're someone that is thinking about getting into Bitcoin mining, I'm going to give you some really rough numbers in Australian dollars. One Bitcoin mining machine that I've bought, $6,500 for one machine. It's going to last about 5 years. It costs about $4,000 a year in running costs, okay? That leaves you $2,500 left over after you pay for expenses. Hey, just quickly, if you're ready to dive deeper into crypto and Bitcoin and build real wealth, join my free crypto collective community. It's where I share exclusive insights and strategies and live discussions to help you succeed. Whether you're a beginner or scaling your portfolio, click on the link in the description and join us today. Now back to the episode. All right, here's an interesting question. This is high level stuff here. Do you think that Trump will introduce a USD stablecoin within the next 12 months? I'm going to say probably not. Okay, and the reason why I say that, and I'm not a chief economist and I'm not in Trump's Oval Office, but it just doesn't make sense for me that he's going to go and create his own US stablecoin when there's already US-based stablecoins around. Think about Tether, for example. Like they've already got the infrastructure, they've got the know-how, the tech, they're already in place. It would make sense perhaps they either partner with them or they just let them do their thing. I do know though that the President Trump is wanting to implement a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Now, what's interesting about that is that all the states now, and as of recording, which is now in February of 2025, as of now, there's already 32 states that have indicated that they want to also have their own Bitcoin, strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? Which is incredible. Now that we're over the 25 states, we only need to get to 50 to get them all in, it's going to be a snowball reaction. They're all trying to now front run the federal government. Yeah, some of them will do it, some of them won't. And this is why the race is on. This is why it's so important for everybody to start accumulating Bitcoin today. All right, let's jump into the next question. And it is, any idea which banks are crypto friendly? This question comes up all the time. Now, let me give you some context behind this question. If you're someone new to Bitcoin, that's great, but you're going to have to now try and get your money from your bank account into your crypto exchange. And there are a number of crypto exchanges in Australia. The two probably big ones that I can think of, CoinSpot and the one that I use, SwiftX. And it seems simple, right? I'm just going to simply go to my net bank, might be Commonwealth Bank or National Australia Bank, and transfer the money over. You would think it's simple. But it's not so simple because the banks are very, very restrictive when it comes to you transferring your money to where you want it to go to, right? And so what we've found in recent times, particularly since Bitcoin has reached all-time highs, when it does that, there's a lot of interest that comes into the market, right? Everyone's thinking, oh, Bitcoin's at all-time high, I need to get some. And so there's a rush into the banks to try and transfer money into exchanges. And the banks are starting to clamp down on who they will allow to transfer money. So I can tell you, I was using Macquarie, for example, Macquarie Bank. I've been transferring money over to my SwiftX exchange for over a year, no problems whatsoever. But one of my members in my crypto collective group, he has just tried to do the same thing. And guess what? Macquarie are now not allowing you to transfer money, right? Now, they're still letting me do it. But if you're a new person, a new customer of Macquarie, they're just putting a blanket rule down, just saying, look, we're just not doing it anymore. So this is moving constantly. The rules and regulation and who does it and who's not doing it is moving constantly. All I can say to you is come into my free private group in Crypto Collective. You'll find the link in the description somewhere. We are talking about this type of thing all the time, and a lot of the members are relaying feedback into the group about which bank is currently allowing them, what sort of restrictions there are, and more importantly, which banks are not allowing you. Because the last thing that you want to do is go to all the trouble, and it is a pain in the ass these days to go and set up a bank account, especially if you're setting up some sort of unique legal entity like a company or a trust. You go to all that trouble, then you go to all the trouble of setting up a bank account in XYZ Bank, and then you find out they won't allow you to send money. In fact, some of the banks will even close your account or disable your account altogether. So then you've got to start the whole process again. So it's a real big pain. So come and join the community, get into the discussion, because I can tell you, if you don't get in the discussion and find out what's going on in real time, it will cost you money. Because this is what's going to happen. You're going to come to the realization, if you haven't already, that Bitcoin is probably the right thing for you to build generational wealth, whether it's through your super fund, like what I do, and also my company and personal name. But you're going to come to that realization. You're going to transfer a whole bunch of money either into your bank account or out of your super. You're going to want to start transferring that money over, and you're going to get a big red cross. And they're going to say, sorry, we're not going to allow you to do that anymore. And you're going to be really deflated about it, because what's going to happen, this always happens actually, you go to buy the Bitcoin by transferring the money over, and then all of a sudden the Bitcoin price just starts going up. Something's happened and it's just going up and up, and you're just sitting on the sidelines. You can't now buy, so you're now having to pay a high price. So all I can say to you is get onto it as soon as possible, because even once you've got money sitting in the bank, like you might have $200,000-$300,000 sitting in your bank, you're trying to get it over. Guess what? You can only do it at a certain chunk per day. Like your bank might only allow you to send $10,000 a day, right? It's going to take you forever to get that money across, and you're going to be absolutely panic stricken as you see the price going up, right? So make sure you get into the community fast, get a part of the conversation. All right, let's go to the next question. What percentage of your portfolio is in Bitcoin versus altcoins? Okay, I actually sat down the other day and worked out that 90% of my overall portfolio, which includes my superannuation, which is all converted into Bitcoin, my company treasury, and my personal name savings, out of all that put together, 90% is in Bitcoin, and 10% is in altcoins. So basically 10% is basically gambling, which is totally fine with me. I'm happy to play those games. And 90% is in Bitcoin. So when you want to start thinking about building up your portfolios, I always say to people, there's a super high risk with going into altcoins. Super high risk. I've got some altcoins right now. I've said it before, 70% down. Okay, so imagine this. You've just moved over $100,000. Pretend you put it into altcoin and now it's sitting at 30 grand, right? You are going to be shitting yourself, okay? And this is where you hear about people getting wrecked and then they sell out at 30,000. Now they've lost $70,000. Your number one goal right now is to just buy Bitcoin. Just make it simple, right? Don't even worry about altcoins, because I know it's easy to get tied up into it, particularly when you're new, because you see other people on TikTok and they're like, oh, I just spent $100 and then I pulled out $600,000, you know, just some crazy number, right? Those types of numbers are few and far between. If you just want to stay sane, not lose it, keep your life stress-free, just accumulate Bitcoin as much as possible and just forget about it. And you'll wake up in years to come and you'll be thanking your lucky stars that you did just that. Okay, next question. If Bitcoin eventually reaches hyper adoption, do you think governments will allow it to exist freely, or will they find a way to regulate and control it? Really, really great question. keep in mind, Bitcoin is decentralized. So there's not one entity that controls Bitcoin, right? Even Michael Saylor, for example, who owns now almost 500,000 Bitcoin under Strategy B, his company, that is about something like 2% of the total supply. So he can't, even at that amount, he can't even get to a point where he's got 50% accumulation of the overall Bitcoin number. So keep in mind, 21 million will be the maximum number of Bitcoin ever produced, 21 million. There are suggestions right now that 5 million of those Bitcoin are gone. So that leaves 16 million that will ever be available. To date, although there will only ever be 21 million, there's already been about 19.5 to 20 million that have already been mined out of the system, which means there's only 1 million that will be mined out and available over the next 100 odd years. So I think it's about 115 more years to go, right, until they're all mined out. So in order for a country or a person or a company to control the Bitcoin network, they would have to accumulate over 50% of the available Bitcoin. So even if you said that 21 million was available, they would have to have about 10.5 million plus Bitcoin. That is a shit ton of Bitcoin, right? That's why I mentioned Michael Saylor, who's got one of the largest bags of Bitcoin. He's only got 500,000, okay? There is talk right now that in the near future, there will be a time when you can't even buy Bitcoin, right? No one will sell it for cash, right? And you're going to say, well, what's the point of buying Bitcoin then? Why would you buy Bitcoin if you can't even sell it? Well, you could sell it. I'm not saying you can't, but why would you sell it? Like, let's say today, for example, it's roughly 100,000 US dollars, right? In the future, it's going to be $1 million. Would you sell it at $1 million? But then knowing that it's going to go to $10 million, right? You would get rid of that asset knowing it's going to go to 10 million. You would get rid of it at 10 million, knowing it's going to go to 100 million. Now, it may not get to $100 million in your lifetime. But so here's what you can do though. And I mentioned this before in the Q&A, which was that you can borrow against the Bitcoin. So now there's no need to actually sell the Bitcoin. You can continue holding onto the Bitcoin, seeing it increase in value into the future. And then when you borrow the money against the Bitcoin, that money that you borrow is now tax-free. You don't, it's crazy, right? And this is what all the super duper wealthy people do, is they borrow against their assets, right? And you can do the same thing for Bitcoin. To answer your question, I don't see any country controlling Bitcoin. Could they, though, regulate it through the taxation system? That is a different idea, which is, yes, they could. But what's going to happen is there's an argument right now, which is countries need to attract the best people possible. In this day and age, we don't have to stay, for example, we don't have to live in Australia forever. I know a friend right now who's moving to Cyprus. Why is he doing that? Because it has a better lifestyle, less taxes, less restrictions than what we do in Australia. In Australia, we like to think we're like this free country, but we are so heavily taxed. It's ridiculous. We're taxed basically out of existence. Imagine going to a country where there's no tax. President Trump is already talking about getting rid of all income tax, for residents. Why don't we do that in Australia? Right? Get rid of all income tax in Australia so we can live and not be under the thumb of the government. So to answer your question there really quickly, yes, the government could tax you out of existence. They could simply say, okay, for any capital gains on Bitcoin, we're going to tax you. Already there's a tax on capital gains, but they might say it's a 75% tax on it, right? That would be brutal. But like I said before, you could borrow against your Bitcoin, right? Now, they could bring in a tax, which is what the Greens and Labor are trying to do in Australia, which is what's called unrealised capital gain tax, which means that even if you haven't sold it, they're going to tax you on the increase. That would be absolute devastation. And while I'm at it, these are the types of things that you need to think about as we come up into the election of 2025, which is going to happen in April or May, right? Are you going to support a party that would tax your unrealized gains? I dare say you wouldn't. But if you think about a party like the Greens, they want to not just do unrealized gains tax, they want to tax more on your properties. They also want to do an inheritance tax. So when we're talking about generational wealth, and Bitcoin is a generational wealth type of asset, if you want to pass that on to your children, that's where they're going to tax you, right? They're trying to do the same type of thing right now in the UK, and the farmers are marching in the street against it, right? Inheritance tax. So it is a big problem, but in Australia, we do have the right to vote. So you can vote those types of parties out who are supporting those types of regressive policies. All right, next question. What's your long-term plan for securing and passing down your Bitcoin to the next generation? First of all, is not voting for a party that's going to tax the inheritance, right? Tax my generational wealth. Because most people want to build generational wealth for their families. Some people are in the position to do that while others are not. I'm trying to get myself in that position to pass on a large sum of generational wealth to my children. Why? Because I can, right? Everyone in Australia is in the position to do this, right? So don't say you're not. And so what are the type of strategies I'm doing? So the first thing I think about is securing the asset, okay? You hear lots of reports about people who lose their Bitcoin, which is terrible. They lose it through hacking or they misplace their keys, right? Which is essentially their passwords to access the Bitcoin. Now, unlike a bank, let's say you had money in a bank, and let's say you lost your passwords to your net banking. No problem, you just ring up the bank, hey, I lost my passwords, you get new passwords. Bitcoin is not like that. If you lose your keys to your Bitcoin, that is it. There's no Bitcoin hotline, you can't ring them up. Now, there is a way around this, and that is investing through what's called Bitcoin proxies, right? So for example, the ETF, which is the exchange traded fund, there is a Bitcoin ETF. One of the biggest ones in the world is BlackRock. Now, if you wanted to, you could invest in the Bitcoin ETF, which means that you don't personally hold custody of your Bitcoin. BlackRock hold custody of the Bitcoin, basically. Okay, so if you lose your passwords to BlackRock to access your Bitcoin, no problem, you can ring up BlackRock. And a lot of people recently have actually done this, even people who we thought were what they call Bitcoin maxis. They've just realized, you know what, I don't want to take the risk of holding the keys myself, because what happens if I have an accident, I lose my memory, etc., etc. How am I going to pass on this to my children or my wife or whatever it is? So they're now invested into these Bitcoin proxies. Another way would be to think about MicroStrategy B. They're called MicroStrategy B now, and they are a Bitcoin proxy. Another Bitcoin proxy is mining machines, but probably one of the safest ones, where you would argue would probably be the ETFs. Okay, that would be something that you could invest in, pass on to your children, just like owning shares. That's something to think about. Now, that said, I've already spoken about what I think will happen in the future, which will be banks will custody Bitcoin. So now this will take away the issue of having to hold the Bitcoin yourself. You can now park it in a bank, just like you do your cash, just perhaps like you have shares in a stock exchange. They now hold the Bitcoin on your behalf. Now you can perhaps sleep easier. So I'm not saying that I wouldn't hold my Bitcoin in a bank in the future. Maybe there's some security measures in place that would make me feel more comfortable. Maybe I split my Bitcoin at that point. Let's say in the future, I've got $100 million worth of Bitcoin. I could share it up into me personally holding 50 million, and that perhaps the bank holds another 50 million. So these are the types of things I think that we'll start thinking about in the future as the wealth grows as well. But as of today, I take a lot of measures in protecting my wealth, and I actually give a step-by-step guide of all the things that I do to protect my Bitcoin. You can jump into my free community, which you'll find somewhere in the description on this, called the Crypto Collective. Absolutely free. Come and join us, and I'll see you there. All right, guys, last question. This one is a really interesting one, which I will try not to rant on to for 15 minutes. The question is, what is the point of building generational wealth if it takes your whole life, right? And I saw the person that asked this question, and I wanted to put into some context, is they were much younger than me, right? When you have children, which I do, I have 2 young girls, you then start to think about the future of your children. And that's when you start thinking about generational wealth, not just for my children, but also for my grandchildren. So for me personally, even if it takes the entire rest of my life to build up a bunch of assets, mainly Bitcoin, to pass on to my children, then so be it. That's what it's going to do. Now, I think this person was also asking in the context of they want to be wealthy today, but they're going to have to wait their whole life to do so. Well, basically not. I know for some people, when you're like 20, and if I said to you, hey, it's going to take you 10 years to build up $10 million, for example, you're thinking, oh my God, that's forever. I can't wait that long. Show me a way that I can just make $10 million in 30 days. And unfortunately, it just doesn't happen like that. It takes time to build wealth, right? So certainly something for you guys to think about. Is it about you? Is it about your children? And is it about your grandchildren? But all I can say, if you don't have an interest in building wealth at all, it is very, very hard to do. But I love thinking about building wealth. I love thinking about business, and I love thinking about Bitcoin and creating generational wealth, not just for my children, but also my grandchildren. And I'm sure you can start thinking about that too, if that's of interest to you. And keep in mind too, if you don't like thinking about generational wealth, then don't build it. If you don't want to do work to build generational wealth, you don't have to do that either. Nothing comes for free. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Thank you so much again for all the people that have sent me DMs through Instagram and TikTok and what have you. And thank you so much. I hope you got something out of the Q&A. See you next time. Thanks for tuning in to Crypto Collective. If you've enjoyed this episode, the best way to show your support is to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, and make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode. You can also find more of me at I'm Matthew Fraser on all social media platforms.